The scream that tore through the storm was the kind that made men reach for their guns. But Dakota Harlow had already moved before the sound fully registered. Rain lashed across the Arizona territory like bullets from heaven, and lightning cracked open the sky to reveal her. A woman in a torn calico dress stumbling through the mud behind Fort Bowie's trading post. Behind her, dark figures materialized through the downpour, 9 men spreading out like wolves on the hunt, their intentions clear in the way they advanced with methodical patience. Dakota had been checking on his horse in the livery stable when he heard it, and now his boots hit the flooded street at a dead run. The woman's dark hair was plastered to her face, and her eyes went wide when she saw him, a stranger materializing from the storm like an answer to a prayer she had been too terrified to speak. She changed direction, running straight toward him with the last of her strength, her bare feet sliding in the mud. "Get behind me right now," Dakota said, his voice cutting through the thunder as he positioned himself between her and the approaching men. His hand hovered over the Colt revolver at his hip, and though his heart was pounding hard enough to crack ribs, his stance was steady as granite. The woman pressed herself against his back, her fingers clutching at his rain-soaked shirt, and he could feel her trembling like a frightened bird. The 9 men slowed their approach, fanning out in a semicircle. The one in the center, a thick-necked brute with a scar running down his cheek, grinned through the rain. "That is our property you are protecting, friend. Her father sold her to cover his gambling debts. We paid good money, and we have come to collect." Dakota's jaw tightened. "I do not see a bill of sale. I do not see anything but a scared woman and 9 men who should be ashamed to call themselves such. In the Arizona territory, we do not trade in human lives, no matter what some drunk fool promised you." "You are just one man," another of the group called out, a wiry fellow with a knife visible at his belt. "You cannot stop all of us. Walk away and we will forget we saw you." The woman's grip on Dakota's shirt tightened, and he could hear her ragged breathing even over the roar of the storm. "I am one man who is not moving," Dakota replied, his voice quiet but carrying the kind of certainty that came from having nothing left to lose. "So you have a choice to make, and you better make it quick before I lose what little patience I have left." Lightning flashed again, and in that brilliant white light, Dakota saw the men exchange glances. They were calculating odds, weighing whether one woman was worth dying over. The scarred leader's hand moved toward his gun, but before he could clear leather, Dakota had his Colt drawn and aimed, the movement so smooth it seemed like magic. "I would not," Dakota said softly. The tension stretched like a bowstring pulled too tight, and for a moment the only sounds were the hammering rain and the woman's frightened breaths. Then a new voice cut through the storm, old and gravelly and backed by authority. "What in the name of hell is going on out here?" Sheriff Thomas Brennan emerged from the darkness, his silver star barely visible in the gloom, but his presence shifted everything. The old lawman's eyes swept over the scene, taking in the 9 men, Dakota with his gun drawn and the terrified woman sheltering behind the cowboy. "Somebody better start talking, and it better be the truth." The scarred man tried to smooth his expression into something reasonable. "Sheriff, this is a private matter. That woman's father owes us money and we are simply collecting on a debt." "That's so." Sheriff Brennan turned his attention to the woman. "Miss, is this true? Did your father sell you to these men?" She stepped out from behind Dakota slightly, though she kept one hand fisted in his shirt like a lifeline. Her voice was hoarse but steady when she spoke. "My name is Violet Owens. My father is a drunk and a gambler. And yes, he made some kind of deal with these men without my knowledge or consent. But I am not property to be bought or sold, Sheriff. I am a free woman, and I would rather die in this storm than go anywhere with them." Sheriff Brennan nodded slowly, then turned his cold gaze on the 9 men. "Well then, seems to me we have a simple situation. The lady has made her choice clear, and in the Arizona Territory, a woman's word about her own fate carries weight. So here is what is going to happen. You men are going to turn around and walk away, and if I see any of your faces in Fort Bowie after sunrise tomorrow, I will find reasons to lock every last one of you up. We clear?" The scarred man's face twisted with anger. "We paid $300 for her." "Then you were swindled by a drunk, and you have my sympathies," the sheriff replied without an ounce of sympathy in his tone. "But that is not her problem, and it sure as hell is not mine. Now get out of my sight before I decide you have been disturbing the peace." For a long moment, the 9 men stood frozen in the rain, and Dakota kept his gun steady, ready for them to make a stupid choice. But Sheriff Brennan's reputation was well earned, and whatever fight they had brought with them slowly drained away. The scarred man spat in the mud, then jerked his head toward his companions. "This is not over," he muttered, but he was already backing away. "Oh, I think it is," Dakota said quietly, his finger still resting on the trigger. "Because if I see you near her again, there will not be any more talking." The 9 men melted back into the storm, their shapes disappearing into the darkness until only the rain remained. Dakota waited a full minute before he holstered his Colt, and even then he did not relax. Sheriff Brennan watched the darkness where the men had vanished, then turned to study Dakota and Violet with shrewd eyes. "Dakota Harlow," the sheriff said, "I might have known you would be in the middle of this. You have a habit of finding trouble." "Trouble finds me, Sheriff," Dakota replied. "I just happen to be in the right place." Violet finally released Dakota's shirt, though she swayed slightly when she let go, exhaustion and fear catching up with her now that the immediate danger had passed. Dakota turned and caught her elbow, steadying her. Up close, even drenched and terrified, she was striking, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of honey that held more strength than her trembling frame suggested. "Thank you," she whispered, and those 2 words carried the weight of everything she had just escaped. "Can you walk?" Dakota asked gently, and she nodded, though he could see the lie in how her legs shook. He looked at Sheriff Brennan. "Is it safe to take her to the boarding house?" "Safer than standing in the street," the sheriff agreed. "Miss Owens, you have a place to stay." Violet shook her head, water streaming from her hair. "I ran from my father's shack outside of town. I do not have anywhere to go, no money, nothing." Sheriff Brennan rubbed his weathered face. "The boarding house is full up with the cattle drive that came through yesterday, but Mrs. Chen, who runs the restaurant, has a room above her kitchen she rents out sometimes. I will see if she has space." He paused, studying Dakota. "You planning to see this through, boy?" Dakota met the old sheriff's eyes and found himself nodding before he had fully decided. "Yes, sir. I am not leaving her unprotected, not while those men might still be around." Something that might have been approval flickered across the sheriff's face. "Then come on. Let us get her out of this storm before she catches her death." They hurried through the flooded streets of Fort Bowie, which was more of a settlement than a proper town, clustered around the military fort that gave it its name. The rain was finally starting to ease, turning from a torrential downpour to a steady drumming that still soaked them through. Mrs. Chen's restaurant was a low adobe building with a covered porch, and light glowed warm through the windows. The elderly Chinese woman took one look at Violet's condition and started issuing orders in rapid English mixed with Cantonese, bustling the shivering woman inside and wrapping her in blankets before anyone could explain the situation. Sheriff Brennan laid out the basics while Mrs. Chen made tea, and the restaurant owner's face grew hard as stone when she heard about the 9 men. She stays here, Mrs. Chen declared in a tone that brooked no argument. Upstairs room, no charge until she is back on her feet. And if those men come near my restaurant, they will learn I am not defenseless. She gestured to a shotgun mounted above the door, and Dakota believed her absolutely. Thank you, madam, Violet said softly, her hands wrapped around a cup of hot tea. Some color was returning to her face, though her eyes still held shadows of fear. I will repay you somehow, I swear it. We will worry about that later, Mrs. Chen said briskly. First, hot bath, dry clothes, food, and sleep. Everything else can wait until morning. She fixed Dakota with a sharp look. You, cowboy, you are the one who protected her. Yes, madam. Then you come back tomorrow. She will want to thank you properly when she is not half drowned. It was not a suggestion. Sheriff Brennan cleared his throat. I will keep extra patrols tonight, but those men seemed like the type who value their own skins. Likely they will move on. Still, Miss Owens, you should stay close to town for a while, at least until we are sure they have given up. Violet nodded, and her eyes found Dakota's across the room. I do not even know how to thank you, Mr. Harlow. You risked your life for a stranger. It was the right thing to do, Dakota said simply, though something in his chest felt tight when she looked at him like that, like he was something more than just a drifter cowboy with worn boots and a borrowed horse. You get some rest, Miss Owens. I will be around if you need anything. He left with Sheriff Brennan, and the night air felt cold after the warmth of the restaurant. They walked in silence for a moment before the sheriff spoke. That was a brave thing you did, son. Stupid, maybe, but brave. Could not walk away, Dakota said. No, I suppose you could not. The sheriff paused at the corner where their paths would diverge. You planning to stay in Fort Bowie for a while? Dakota shrugged. Was heading west to California, but I suppose I can stay a few days, make sure she is all right. Sheriff Brennan smiled slightly. Something tells me it might be longer than a few days. Get some sleep, Dakota. Tomorrow is likely to be interesting. Dakota returned to the small room he rented above the livery stable, but sleep was a long time coming. He kept seeing those honey-colored eyes looking up at him through the rain, kept feeling the trust in how she had grabbed his shirt like he was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. He had been drifting for 3 years since his parents died in a prairie fire, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots, but something about tonight felt different. Something about her felt different. Morning came with the clean, washed clarity that follows a storm, the sky so blue it hurt to look at, and the air carrying the scent of sage and wet earth. Dakota checked on his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Copper, then made his way to Mrs. Chen's restaurant. It was early enough that the breakfast crowd had not yet arrived, and he found Violet at a corner table, wearing a simple blue dress that Mrs. Chen must have loaned her. Her dark hair was braided back from her face, and though she still looked tired, she was no longer the terrified woman from the storm. She looked up when he entered, and her face transformed with a smile that made his heart do something complicated. Mr. Harlow, please sit down. Mrs. Chen is making breakfast, and she insisted I wait for you. Just, Dakota is fine, he said, settling into the chair across from her. Up close in the daylight, he could see the golden flecks in her eyes, the delicate strength in her jaw. She was maybe 23 or 24, he guessed, close to his own 26 years. Then you must call me Violet. She folded her hands on the table, and he noticed the calluses there, the signs of hard work. I've been trying to figure out what to say to you, how to express what you did for me last night. You put yourself between me and death without hesitation, without even knowing my name. I would do it again, Dakota said honestly. I believe you would. She took a breath. I need to tell you about my situation, why those men were after me. You deserve to know what you might have walked into." Dakota leaned back in his chair. "You do not owe me your story, Violet, but I want to tell you." She glanced around, making sure they were alone except for Mrs. Chen cooking in the back. "My father was a prospector who never found gold, a farmer who could not keep crops alive, and most successfully, a drunk. We have been living in a shack outside Fort Bowie for 6 months, and in that time he has gambled away everything we had. 2 weeks ago he came home and told me he had finally had a big win, that our luck was changing. I should have known better." Her voice tightened. 3 days ago, those 9 men showed up. They were part of a gang that runs gambling operations throughout the territory, moving from town to town. Their leader, the one with the scar, said my father had lost heavily to them and had offered me as payment. They gave me a week to prepare myself, said they would come collect me and take me to work in their establishments. You can imagine what kind of work they meant. Dakota's hands clenched into fists on the table. "Where is your father now?" "I do not know and I do not care," Violet said, and there was steel beneath the hurt in her voice. "When I confronted him, he said it was just business, that I should be grateful he had found me a situation. He said a woman like me, with no prospects and no husband, should take what I could get. So I waited until he passed out drunk and I ran. I had nowhere to go, no plan beyond getting away. Then the storm hit, and they found me behind the trading post. If you had not been there." She trailed off, not needing to finish the thought. Mrs. Chen emerged from the kitchen with plates piled high with eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits. She set them down with a knowing look, then disappeared again, giving them privacy. Dakota waited until Violet had taken a few bites before he spoke. "So what happens now? Do you have family elsewhere, anyone who could help you?" Violet shook her head. "My mother died when I was 12. I have an aunt in Missouri, but I have not seen her in 10 years, and I have no money for a train ticket even if she would take me in. The truth is, I am alone, Dakota. I have nothing but the dress I am wearing, which is not even mine, and the kindness of strangers." She met his eyes steadily. "I am not looking for rescue. I will find work, pay my own way. I just need time to figure out how. What kind of work did you do before?" Dakota asked. "Everything and nothing. I can cook, clean, sew, tend animals, keep books. My mother taught me to read and write, and I am decent with numbers. I helped my father with his various ventures, though clearly my business sense was better than his." A hint of bitter humor touched her voice. "I am a hard worker, Dakota. I just need a chance." An idea was forming in Dakota's mind, something he had been considering for the past year but had never quite found the courage to pursue. He owned a small ranch about 20 miles north of Fort Bowie, a piece of land he had bought with his inheritance before drifting away from it. It was not much, just 160 acres with a stream running through it and a half-finished cabin, but it was his, and lately the rootless wandering had been feeling more empty than free. "I might have something," Dakota said slowly. "I own a ranch north of here. It is rough and needs a lot of work, but there is a cabin and some cleared land. I have been planning to settle there properly, build it up. I could use help, someone to manage the household side of things while I work the land and the livestock. It would be legitimate work, room and board plus a fair wage once the ranch starts paying. You would have your own space, your own independence." Violet's eyes widened. "You are offering me a job just like that," Dakota confirmed. "Though I will be honest, it will be hard work and lonely out there. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, but you would be safe and you would be earning your own way." "Why?" Violet asked quietly. "Why would you do this for me? You do not know me." Dakota considered the question, trying to put into words something he barely understood himself. "Last night in the storm, I saw someone who refused to give up, who kept running even when 9 men were hunting her. That takes strength, Violet. And maybe I am tired of drifting, tired of leaving my land to sit empty while I pretend I do not want to belong somewhere. Maybe we can help each other. Violet was quiet for a long moment, her food forgotten. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. Yes. Yes, I accept your offer, Dakota Harlow, and I promise you will not regret it. They shook hands across the table, and the touch of her palm against his sent something electric up Dakota's arm. From the way Violet's breath caught, she felt it too. They pulled back quickly, both suddenly very interested in their breakfast, but Dakota could not stop the small smile that tugged at his lips. Sheriff Brennan stopped by while they were finishing their meal, his expression cautious. Wanted you both to know, those 9 men rode out at first light. I made sure of it personally, but I also sent word to the law in the surrounding territories about what they tried to do. If they are smart, they will stay far away from Fort Bowie. Thank you, Sheriff, Violet said with genuine relief. The old lawman studied them both. What are your plans now, if you do not mind me asking? Miss Owens has agreed to work at my ranch, Dakota said. We will be heading up there in the next day or two once we get supplies together. Sheriff Brennan's eyebrows rose, but he just nodded slowly. That is good land up there, Dakota. About time you did something with it. You need any help getting set up, you let me know. And Miss Owens, you are welcome back in Fort Bowie anytime. Mrs. Chen seems to have adopted you already. Over the next 2 days, Dakota and Violet prepared for the move to the ranch. Mrs. Chen provided clothes and supplies, refusing payment and saying only that helping women in need was a duty, not a favor. Dakota bought provisions at the trading post including flour, salt, coffee, and beans, along with seed for a garden and chickens to start a small flock. He also purchased a gentle mare for Violet to ride, a gray with kind eyes and a patient disposition. During those 2 days, they talked constantly, learning each other's stories in the way of people who sensed their lives were intertwining. Dakota told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about losing his parents and selling the family land because the memories were too painful. He told her about drifting from town to town, working as a ranch hand and occasional scout for the army, never quite finding a place that felt like home until he stumbled onto the land north of Fort Bowie, and something in his chest said, "Here." Violet told him about a childhood spent moving from one failed venture to another, about a mother who died of fever and a father who drowned his grief in whiskey and cards. She spoke of dreams she had given up on, of wanting to be a teacher but having no money for normal school, of learning to make do and survive when others might have given up. She was honest about her fears too, about not knowing if she could trust herself to judge character after her father's betrayal, about worrying that she was running toward another kind of trap. "It is not a trap," Dakota assured her on the evening before they were to leave, as they sat on Mrs. Chen's porch watching the sun paint the desert gold. "I will not lie and say I do not find you attractive, Violet, because I do. But this is a job, pure and simple, and you have my word as a man that you will be treated with respect. You will have your own space in the cabin, your own key to the door. If at any point you want to leave, I will bring you back to Fort Bowie or pay for passage wherever you want to go." Violet turned to look at him, and in the fading light her eyes were luminous. "I trust you, Dakota. I know that probably sounds foolish given everything, but when you stepped between me and those men, something in me recognized something in you. I cannot explain it better than that." "I know what you mean," Dakota said softly, because he did. He felt like he had been waiting for something without knowing what it was, and then there she was in the storm, and suddenly the future looked different than it had before. They rode out at dawn, taking it slow to accommodate the pack mule loaded with supplies. The morning was cool and perfect, the kind of day that made you believe in new beginnings. Violet sat her horse well, and Dakota learned she had grown up around animals despite her father's many failures. They talked and rode in comfortable silence by turns, and Dakota found himself watching her face light up when she spotted a hawk riding the thermals or pointing out wildflowers blooming after the storm. The ranch came into view around midday, and Dakota tried to see it through Violet's eyes. The cabin was small, built of timber and adobe with a covered porch and a stone chimney. He had gotten the walls and roof done before his drifting took over, but the interior was sparse, and there was still plenty to do. A creek ran silver through the property, lined with cottonwoods, and the land rolled gently toward distant red cliffs. It was beautiful in a spare, honest way. "It is perfect," Violet breathed, and the wonder in her voice made Dakota's chest feel warm. They spent the afternoon unloading supplies and making the cabin livable. Dakota had built a partition wall inside to create 2 separate sleeping spaces, and Violet's side had a small window that looked toward the creek. They hung curtains for privacy, arranged the few pieces of furniture Dakota had made, and set up a kitchen area around the wood stove. By evening, the cabin felt like a home rather than just a shelter, and they sat on the porch eating dinner and watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Tomorrow we will start on the garden," Dakota said, "and I want to get some repairs done on the barn. There is a lot to do before winter." "I am not afraid of work," Violet said. "Just tell me what you need and I will do my best." The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient. They woke with the sun, worked until their muscles ached, and fell into bed exhausted but satisfied. Dakota repaired fences and cleared land for grazing, planning to buy cattle once they had the infrastructure ready. Violet transformed the area around the cabin, planting a garden that quickly began to sprout green shoots, tending the chickens that began laying eggs reliably, and turning the rough cabin into something that felt warm and welcoming. But it was more than just work. They developed a pattern of morning coffee on the porch, watching the sun turn the cliffs red and gold. They talked during meals about everything and nothing, discovering shared opinions on some things and arguing cheerfully about others. Violet had strong thoughts about politics and social justice, and Dakota loved drawing her into debates just to watch her eyes flash with passion. He told her stories about his travels, and she shared her dreams of maybe running a school someday, teaching children who would not otherwise have access to education. As the weeks passed, Dakota found himself noticing everything about her. The way she hummed while working in the garden, old hymns and folk songs in a voice that was surprisingly lovely. The way she pushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. The way she laughed, full and uninhibited, when he told a particularly bad joke. He noticed how capable she was, how she never shied from hard work, and how she had transformed the cabin with small touches like wildflowers in a jar and curtains that caught the light just right. And he was fairly certain she noticed him too. He caught her watching him sometimes when he was working, her eyes following the movement of his body as he split wood or worked with the horses. She had a way of touching his arm when she wanted his attention, casual but lingering just a heartbeat longer than necessary. Once, when he came in from a long day mending fences, she had heated water for a bath and left it ready for him without being asked, and the thoughtfulness of it made his throat tight. They were careful with each other, conscious of the impropriety of their arrangement even out here where no one could see. They maintained separate spaces, never entering each other's sleeping areas without permission. but the awareness was there, humming between them like a plucked string, growing stronger with each passing day. It was 6 weeks after their arrival when things shifted. Dakota had ridden into Fort Bowie for supplies, and when he returned in late afternoon, he found Violet in the garden with a burlap sack, her face lit with triumph. "Look," she said, pulling him over. "The first carrots are ready. I know they are small, but they are ours, Dakota. We grew them." He looked at the small, orange vegetables in her hands and then at her face, so full of joy over something simple, and something in him cracked open. "Violet," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "I need to tell you something." Her smile faded, replaced by concern. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right, and that is the problem." He took off his hat, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "When I hired you, I meant it to be just that, a job. I told myself I was helping someone in need, giving you a chance to get back on your feet. But somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of you as my employee and started thinking of you as something else." Violet set down the carrots carefully, her honey-colored eyes searching his face. "What kind of something else?" "The kind where I count the minutes until you wake up in the morning. The kind where I find excuses to be near you, to make you laugh, to see you smile. The kind where I lie awake at night knowing you are just on the other side of that wall, and it feels like the longest distance in the world." He met her eyes steadily. "I am falling in love with you, Violet Owens, and I needed you to know." For a moment she just stared at him, and Dakota's heart hammered against his ribs. Then she stepped forward and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I was starting to think you would never say anything," she said softly. "I have been in love with you for weeks, Dakota Harlow. I tried to fight it, tried to tell myself it was just gratitude or proximity, but I was lying to myself. You are the best man I have ever known, and not just because you saved my life. You saved me in other ways too, gave me a reason to believe in myself again, made me feel like I belonged somewhere." Dakota cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking along her cheekbones. "Can I kiss you?" "You better," Violet said with a shaky laugh. And then his lips were on hers, and nothing had ever felt so right. She tasted like sunshine, and the mint she grew by the kitchen door. And when her arms came around his neck, pulling him closer, Dakota felt like he had finally come home after years of wandering. The kiss was sweet and searching, a question and an answer all at once, and when they finally pulled apart they were both breathing hard. "Well," Violet said, her eyes shining, "that was worth waiting for." "I have wanted to do that since the day we rode out here," Dakota admitted. "You looked so happy on that gray mare, pointing out every bird and flower, and I thought I would lose my mind if I could not kiss you." She laughed and kissed him again, quicker this time but no less sweet. "So what happens now? Where do we go from here?" "Wherever you want," Dakota said seriously. "This does not change anything you do not want changed, Violet. You still have your own space, your own choices. I am not expecting anything just because I said what I feel." Violet pulled back enough to give him an exasperated look. "Dakota Harlow, I just told you I am in love with you. Do you really think I want to keep sleeping in a separate room pretending we are just business partners?" "I want to do this right," Dakota said. "I want to marry you, Violet. I want you to be my wife, not just the woman I am living with. I know we have not known each other long, but out here time moves different. I know my own heart." Tears gathered in Violet's eyes, catching the late afternoon sun. "You want to marry me, truly, truly, honestly, more than I have wanted anything in my life." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I bought this in Fort Bowie today. I have been carrying it around trying to figure out when to ask you, and I guess now is the time." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small garnet set in it, the red stone glowing like captured fire. "It is not much, but the jeweler said garnet is for devotion and truth, and that seemed right. Violet Owens, will you marry me and make this ranch into a home? Will you build a life with me and let me spend every day trying to make you happy?" Violet was crying in earnest now, but she was smiling too, and she nodded so hard he worried she might hurt herself. "Yes, yes, Dakota, I will marry you. I will be your wife and your partner and whatever else you need me to be." He slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, like it had been meant for her all along. Then he was kissing her again, deeper this time, pouring everything he felt into it, and she responded with equal passion. When they finally broke apart, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that matched the joy spreading through Dakota's chest. They rode back to Fort Bowie 3 days later to make arrangements with the circuit preacher who came through once a month. Mrs. Chen was delighted by the news and immediately took charge of planning a small celebration at her restaurant. Sheriff Brennan offered to give Violet away since she had no family to do it, and the old lawman's eyes grew suspiciously bright when she accepted with a grateful hug. The wedding took place on a Sunday morning 2 weeks later in the small church that served Fort Bowie and the surrounding area. Violet wore a dress that Mrs. Chen and the other women of the town had sewn together, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and sleeves. Dakota wore his best clothes, his dark hair slicked back, his hands steady as he slipped a matching gold band onto his own finger. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Dakota kissed his bride with all the tenderness and promise he possessed, and the small gathering cheered. The celebration at Mrs. Chen's restaurant was joyful and loud, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. Dakota watched Violet laugh with the women who had befriended her, watched her dance with Sheriff Brennan while the old man pretended to be gruff about it, and marveled that this remarkable woman had agreed to spend her life with him. When she caught his eye across the room and smiled, his heart felt too big for his chest. They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, alone at last, the sounds of celebration fading behind them. The cabin looked welcoming with lamplight glowing in the windows, a beacon in the growing darkness. Dakota helped Violet down from her horse, and for a moment they just stood there, looking at each other as husband and wife for the first time. "Are you nervous?" Dakota asked softly, holding both her hands. "A little," Violet admitted, "but mostly I am happy. So happy I keep thinking I might wake up and find this was all a dream." "It is real," Dakota promised, "and I am going to spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you know it." He swept her up in his arms, making her squeal with surprised laughter, and carried her over the threshold of their home. That night, they made love slowly and tenderly, learning each other with gentle hands and whispered words. Dakota treated Violet like something precious and breakable, and she responded with a passion that undid him completely. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed that was now theirs, and Dakota stroked her dark hair spread across his chest while she traced patterns on his skin. "I never thought I could be this happy," Violet murmured. "After everything with my father, after those men hunting me in the storm, I thought maybe I was not meant for this kind of joy. But then you stepped in front of me and said, 'Get behind me right now,' and my whole life changed." "Mine too," Dakota said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I was just drifting before you, going through the motions of living but not really feeling anything. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something that matters." As summer deepened into fall, they worked together to make the ranch thrive. Dakota bought a small herd of cattle with money he had been saving, and they spent long days mending fences and preparing for winter. Violet's garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables that she preserved in jars for the cold months ahead. They added a smokehouse and a root cellar, expanding their capabilities with each passing week. But it was not all work. They took evenings to walk along the creek, holding hands and talking about their dreams for the future. They made love in the afternoon sometimes, when the work was done early and the cabin was cool and dim. They hosted their first dinner party when Sheriff Brennan and Mrs. Chen rode out to visit, and Violet's cooking earned praise that made her blush with pleasure. They were building not just a ranch but a life, weaving their days together into something strong and beautiful. When winter came, it was harsh, but they were prepared. The cabin stayed warm with the wood stove burning, and they had plenty of food stored away. The isolation did not bother them. They had each other, and that was enough. They spent long evenings reading aloud from the books Violet had bought on one of their trips to Fort Bowie, or playing cards, or simply sitting together watching the snow fall outside their window. It was in February, in the depths of winter, that Violet told Dakota she was pregnant. She said it over breakfast, her voice casual but her eyes bright with emotion. "I think we are going to need to build another room onto the cabin. We are going to need space for a cradle." Dakota's coffee cup clattered against the table. "You mean?" "I mean I am going to have a baby," Violet said, her smile growing. "Our baby, Dakota. By next fall there will be 3 of us." Dakota whooped with joy and came around the table to lift her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop before she got dizzy. He set her down carefully, his hands immediately going to her still flat stomach. "Are you all right? Do you need to rest? Should I ride to Fort Bowie for a doctor?" "I am fine," Violet assured him, covering his hands with hers. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. But yes, we should let the doctor know, and probably Mrs. Chen. She will want to help." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Violet remained active and healthy, insisting on continuing her work until Dakota worried she would overdo it. They built the additional room onto the cabin together, laughing at their carpentry mistakes, but getting it done. Violet sewed blankets and tiny clothes, and Dakota carved a cradle from cottonwood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Their son was born on a warm September evening with Mrs. Chen in attendance and Sheriff Brennan pacing on the porch like a nervous grandfather. The labor was long but not overly difficult, and when Dakota finally heard his child's first cry, tears ran unashamedly down his face. Mrs. Chen placed the baby in his arms moments later, a red-faced, perfect little person who already had a thick shock of dark hair. "He is beautiful," Dakota whispered, carrying the baby to where Violet lay exhausted but radiant in their bed, just like his mother. They named him Daniel Thomas Harlow, after Dakota's father and Sheriff Brennan, who had become like family to them. Little Daniel was an easy baby, quick to smile and generally content, and he transformed their lives in ways both exhausting and wonderful. Dakota discovered he loved fatherhood, loved the feeling of that small warm weight against his chest, loved watching Violet nurse their son with such tenderness it made his heart ache. The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch prospered, growing from a small operation to a respected property that produced quality cattle and horses. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the heavy work, good men who respected that Violet was an equal partner in the enterprise. Daniel grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere and adored his mother with fierce loyalty. When Daniel was 3, Violet gave birth to twin girls, Mary and Rose, who were as different as could be despite being identical in appearance. Mary was bold and adventurous, always climbing things and getting into mischief, while Rose was gentle and thoughtful, content to sit with her mother and learn songs and stories. Dakota built another addition to the cabin, and their home rang with laughter and occasional arguments and all the beautiful noise of family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Dakota and Violet rode out to the spot where he had proposed, leaving the children with Mrs. Chen, who still visited regularly despite her advancing years. They sat by the creek watching the sunset, and Dakota pulled Violet close against his side. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Marrying me, staying here, giving up the chance to see the wider world?" Violet turned to look at him, and her honey-colored eyes were filled with such love it stole his breath. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything I did not even know I wanted, Dakota. A home, a family, safety, love. I could not imagine any other life than this one we built together." "I love you," Dakota said, kissing her softly. "More now than the day we married, if that is even possible." "It is possible," Violet assured him, "because I feel the same way. You are my everything, Dakota Harlow. You were from the moment you stepped between me and those 9 men and told me to get behind you. You have been protecting my heart ever since." As the sun set over their land, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson, they sat together in perfect contentment. The ranch stretched out around them, the cattle lowing in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney of the cabin where their children waited. It was a life neither of them had expected, born from a moment of courage in a storm. But it was theirs, built on love and trust and the simple decision to choose each other every single day. Years continued to pass in the way they do, marked by seasons and birthdays and the slow, steady accumulation of memories. Daniel grew into a fine young man who shared his father's integrity and his mother's sharp mind. The twins became inseparable partners in everything, balancing each other's extremes. There was a 4th child eventually, another boy they named Samuel, who came as a surprise when Violet was 39 and who became the family's darling. Dakota's hair went gray at the temples, and lines formed around Violet's eyes from years of smiling. Their hands grew rough from work, but they still fit together perfectly when they walked along the creek on summer evenings. The ranch became one of the most successful in the territory, and they used their prosperity to help others, offering jobs to those who needed them and supporting Mrs. Chen's efforts to provide education for children in Fort Bowie. Sheriff Brennan passed away when Daniel was 15, and they buried him on a hillside overlooking Fort Bowie, the town he had protected for so many years. At the funeral, Dakota held Violet's hand and thought about how the old lawman had been there at the beginning, had helped save Violet that terrible night, and how his kindness had rippled out through all the years that followed. When Dakota and Violet celebrated their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch that was attended by what seemed like half the territory. There were toasts and speeches and dancing under the stars, and Dakota pulled Violet into his arms for a waltz, moving slowly across the porch they had built together so many years ago. 25 years, Violet marveled, her head resting against his shoulder. "It feels like yesterday and forever all at once." "I would do it all again," Dakota said. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy, all of it, as long as it was with you." Their children grew and began building lives of their own. Daniel married a schoolteacher and took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch, proving himself a worthy successor. Mary became a doctor, one of the first women in the territory to do so, while Rose married a rancher from a neighboring property and gave Dakota and Violet their first grandchildren. Samuel, the baby, surprised everyone by becoming a lawyer, using his sharp mind and sense of justice to help people who could not help themselves. Dakota and Violet moved into a smaller house they built near the creek, giving Daniel and his growing family the main house. They spent their days doing lighter work, tending Violet's ever-expanding gardens and spoiling their grandchildren shamelessly. They sat on their porch every evening watching the sunset, holding hands like they had since the beginning, talking or sitting in comfortable silence as the mood struck them. On a warm evening in late summer, when Dakota was 70 and Violet 68, they sat on that familiar porch watching the sky turn purple and orange. Their hands were clasped together, worn and weathered but still strong, still fit together like two pieces of a puzzle. The sounds of their grandchildren playing drifted from the main house, and somewhere a meadowlark was singing its evening song. "Do you remember that storm?" Violet asked softly. "The one where you found me." "Every detail," Dakota replied. "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen, running through that rain with 9 men after you. I remember how you trusted me, a stranger, to keep you safe." "You did more than keep me safe," Violet said, squeezing his hand. "You gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You built a family with me, a legacy that will continue long after we are gone." "We built it together," Dakota corrected gently. "Every bit of it, side by side." Violet leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky. The ranch stretched out around them, filled with the evidence of their life together, buildings and fences and fields that spoke of decades of work and love. Their children and grandchildren carried their values forward, creating their own stories while honoring the foundation Dakota and Violet had laid. "I love you," Violet whispered. "Then, now, and always." "And I love you," Dakota replied, pressing a kiss to her silver hair. "My Violet, my heart, my home." They sat together as night fell completely, the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient dance, and if you had asked either of them if they had lived a good life, they would have said yes without hesitation. Not because it had been easy or perfect, but because they had lived it together, from that moment in the storm when Dakota had said, "Get behind me right now," and Violet had trusted him with everything she had. They had taken that moment and built an entire lifetime from it, full of love and work and joy and family. And that was the greatest adventure either of them could have asked for. As the years continued to unfold, Dakota and Violet remained fixtures on that porch, watching their legacy grow and flourish around them. They held each other through sorrows and celebrated triumphs together, always side by side, always partners. And when their time finally came, years later, they went peacefully, having lived fully and loved completely, leaving behind a family and a ranch and a story that would be told for generations about the cowboy who stepped between a woman and danger in the storm, and the love that grew from that single moment of courage into something that changed both their worlds forever.